This is an HO scale locomotive. It's very typical of the sort of locomotive I've been buying for the better part of a decade now. It's nice and all, but it's slow, and I have my fears about running it too fast or any sort of derailment causing damage to my model. Well, that's just kind of how it is anymore in this hobby, and boy do I wish I could turn back the clock to a time where trains were for everyone of any age and not just marketed to annoying rivet counting motherfuckers age 18 and up. I'm no time traveler, so I'll have to settle for owning some of these classic trains at least. And I'm going to tell you how easy it actually was for me to get into O-Gauge. Because while its legendary status as a fun train may be intimidating for some, it's very easy to get into it, and I'm going to tell you how. This is not a tutorial video by any means, but I just wanted to share my general thoughts as I own these locomotives and give you what I had as my first steps into O-Gauge. Let's get into it. So of course, I started with a train set. You know, your magic all-in-one box for all your railroading needs. For my budget, I was pretty much looking at the 1970 to 1986 MPC era owned by General Mills and the 1986 to 1995 Lionel Incorporated era. There's a massive smattering of train sets to suit just about any taste, from a goofy circus train to a Conrail freight set to a Phase 1 Amtrak passenger train. There is truly a train set for any kind of taste. Here's my set, a very worn and well-loved Blue Streak freight set from 1973. This set is incredibly typical of the time, with a very, very grossly incorrect baby blue 242 locomotive in central New Jersey markings heading up the train, following by a string of very colorful cars whose markings make very little sense being behind a steam locomotive. This set was my first, and I had hours and hours of fun watching it run around the track with some of the most questionable train sounds of all time. Speaking of track, my set didn't come with any, but my friend who sold me it graciously gave me some track and a little blue transformer to go with it. All this track here is Lionel post-war era track, and it's in quite the state. Rusted through and through. I took some HO scale Bright Boy track cleaners to the rails, and that did the trick for me. It just took a bit of work. About 2 to 3 minutes per section. Classic Toy Trains has a great article on how to do proper work on rusted O-Gauge track, so I'd highly suggest either reading up on how to properly fix this kind of track, or just go searching for new track. Lionel is like drugs. It's dangerously addicting. This honestly mid-tier train set from the 1970s was enough to get the ball rolling on my O-Gauge journey. The next thing I did was require a new boxcar, a Baltimore, Ohio Sentinel 1 from 1980. I very much like the Baltimore, Ohio, if you couldn't tell. For a short time, my friend's Lionel set was at my place, so that came out fairly regularly to run my little set. His Alco FA units also came along to stay for a bit, so those were a ton of fun, and I'm currently searching for that perfect diesel locomotive to own myself. Pretty much the entire reason I wanted an O-Gauge set in the first place was to own this. This is my 1959 post-war era General locomotive, and I've wanted one since I was about 4 years old. I don't remember how I got this, but I had this O'Brien's Collecting Toy Trains book that had the General on the cover. I thought that it was the coolest locomotive ever, and it's probably very influential in my love for 19th century locomotives. Looking at my own General, it's clearly seen better days, but she's mine, and she still runs smooth as clockwork. That's part of the magic of these old post-war era trains. The headlight works, the smoke unit still works. It's amazing to finally own the locomotive I've wanted for 15 years now. The tender doesn't exactly match. It's an 1862 on an 1872. It doesn't have the original operating coupler, and there's a sizable crack in the cab, but she's mine, and just owning the original is all I'm after. It's got magnet traction, which makes hauling every car I have a breeze, and also allows you to pick up a piece of track with this locomotive. Shortly after purchasing the General, my friend's set left my house, so I had to go looking for new track since his squeaky clean track revealed that my rusted out and well-loved track needed some major cleaning that I wasn't capable of repairing at the time. I went searching for new track, but everything these days is Lionel Fast Track or some other type of integrated roadbed track. I wanted the classic tubular track, and a very unlikely source came to the rescue. When picking up some spray paint late at night, I went into my local Menards store, and next to the checkout area, I noticed a Bachmann train set sitting on a shelf. I didn't know Menards stocked any train stuff whatsoever, and I was in for a huge surprise by walking over there. Not only did they have that Bachmann set, but Menards offers a huge variety of in-house created O-gauge train products. From very unique buildings to train cars to a train set with an in-house produced locomotive, I knew I was probably going to become a repeat customer. That day, I would walk out with about 10 pieces of track, which cost me just under $25, and putting it all together, I realized why some people have issues with tubular track. The rust on my old track basically gripped the rails and held my track together. But these new tracks are nice and shiny with no rust, so at higher speeds, the General would literally shake the tracks apart. There are track clips out there, but Menards doesn't stock any, and I don't even know what kind of clip this track would require. So I came up with a 3D print. Just kidding. I don't have that kind of skill. So I used some 3M tape, and it has done a wonderful job. Menards also offers train cars, and they're incredibly affordable, but I would just stick with used cars from brands like Lionel and K-Line for now. These Menards built cars certainly look good and certainly roll well. They don't roll as well as a Lionel car, but still quite good. Now, the real fault of these cars is their couplers. One of the cars came broken from the factory, with one coupler never ever being able to hold any weight. The car was also not assembled properly, and I could just not get this tab to pop back in. I hated having to return these two ore cars. I thought the Norfolk and Western scheme was really good looking on them. The nice thing about Menards, at least, is you can get a new receipt if you lose your old one if you ever need to return something, so returning something is a breeze. This tank car is currently the only Menards car I own, and it's been significantly better. It certainly looks very appealing with this colorful Canadian national paint scheme and costs about a third of what the Lionel equivalent costs. But it still occasionally has a coupler issue, so sometimes I tape the pins down so the coupler stays closed. It runs quite well, and I very much recommend getting a rubber band to keep them closed if you ever have a coupler issue with any car. Of course, Lionel won't just sell me a new coupler, so I might have to replace the entire trucks on this thing if I want to keep it running. I went on to buy more track at Menards about 2 more times, and it was soon time to choose a new locomotive. So I loved my post-war era General, so I turned to another all-time post-war classic. This is my 671 turbine locomotive based upon the Pennsylvania Railroad's S2 turbine locomotive. It's also seen better days. This front shield is wearing off, and just like the General though, she still runs like clockwork. Everything except the headlight works, and it genuinely has the best smoke unit I've ever seen on any locomotive. This locomotive is nearly 5.5 pounds of solid die-cast metal, so hauling all my cars was never going to be even slightly of a problem, even with this locomotive not having magnet traction. Speaking of train cars once again, I also purchased a K-Line Pennsylvania Railroad caboose to match the turbine. It's got lights inside, and it's quite a fun and very cute little caboose. I'm not sure if it's based on any real one, but it's the only lighted train car I own myself, although it's not my first rodeo with one. My turbine included a whistle tender, so naturally I needed a way to use that whistle. I snagged a whistle controller from my train club for cheap, and while it's not great, I did get the whistle to work with it. It's a very neat novelty, especially with it all being mechanical, and you can actually hear it revving up to make the whistle sound. So here is my current O-gauge setup. It takes up about a 12-foot by 3-foot area. It has 031 curves, and here's an 18-inch radius curving HO to give you kind of a size comparison. Whoa. Unlike HO, O-gauge curves are measured in how much space it takes to make a 180-degree corner instead of a 90-degree corner. So I don't want anyone saying O-gauge takes up too much space. Of course, it's all set up on the ground, so it can't just stay up all the time. There's other people here. It takes me about 30 minutes to set up this whole thing, although now I've begun to just tape and keep the sections together for storage. And in doing this, it takes about 5 minutes to set it up this way. So after putting my entire layout together, the real fun begins. First things first, O-gauge runs extremely fast. Most O-gauge locomotives run fast, and derailments do happen from excessive speed, especially when running engines light. They're tough, they can take it, and that's one of the best parts about O-gauge. It's all 3 rails, so the rollers do spark sometimes, so it is very important to keep everything clean, since sparks are usually a sign of dirty track or rollers. O gauge is generally one of the more expensive scales, and I blame modern Lionel for constantly shoving pricey Bluetooth control system and integrated roadbed track down our throats that increases the price. So let's look at all my stuff. This is everything in my collection. How much did all this older stuff and Menards cost me? Well, we need something to compare it to. So let's bring in an HO locomotive to compare it to. This is my 10-wheel, a $250 HO scale steam locomotive. That's a pretty normal price for an HO scale locomotive anymore, and while it's loaded for features, it has not provided me with the same amount of joy as all my O gauge stuff. So, just after the Menards rebate offers from October, this has all cost me just under $275 in the end. I understand I am comparing used stuff to essentially a brand new feature-loaded HO scale locomotive, but you can't just sit there and tell me that this O gauge stuff doesn't offer features. And that pretty much just sums up my first foray into O gauge. It's been about 3 months since that Blue Streak set came into my possession, and between O and HO, I can confidently say I like both of them equally. They offer very different experiences, and as someone who likes variety, I can't put either above the other. HO is a much better social thing with me for train club related experiences, and O has been a very fun solo ride so far. Now, if you would like an ongoing O gauge series here on my little channel, please let me know. I would love to do more with O gauge. Hopefully I'll be back on a semi-regular operating schedule now. We'll see if the Christmas season gives me any sort of time. But for now, stay tuned, stay unruly. MTV signing off.